More developments when it comes to the shooting that took place in Las Vegas. Investigators say Stephen Paddock, the domestic terrorist who gunned down 58 people attending a country music festival, was looking at other places to attack. That's right, he was looking at Fenway Park in Boston, which has hosted several concerts over recent months, and hotels in Chicago overlooking the outdoor music festival Lollapalooza. Not only did police find more than 20 guns in Paddock's hotel room, as well as at his expensive home, plus explosives, more ammunition in his car. Jesus, they also found a device called bump stocks. These devices allow shooters to modify semi-automatic weapons to spray bullets almost at the speed of a semi-automatic weapon. Right now, they are legal, but all of a sudden, there's talk that they could change that.
Fully automatic weapons have been banned for a long time. Apparently, this allows you to take a semi-automatic, turn it into fully automatic, so clearly that's something we need to look into.
Members of both parties and multiple organizations are planning to take a look at bump stocks and related devices. We certainly welcome that, would like to be part of that conversation.
But really, earlier this week, though, as reporters in the White House briefing room asked repeatedly whether Donald Trump would be willing to dive into the gun control debate, Sarah Huckabee Sanders brought up one of the administration's repeated talking points. Oh, the gun violence that is roaring through the city of Chicago, which they have done nothing about, said nothing about, or even visited.
I think if you look to Chicago, where you had over 4,000 victims of gun-related crimes last year, they have the strictest gun laws in the country. That certainly hasn't helped there. So I think we have to, when that time comes for those conversations to take place, then I think we need to look at things that may actually have that real impact.
Joining me via Skype from Hampton Roads, Virginia, is Kayla Hicks, Director of African American Outreach for the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. Kayla, every time I hear the Trump administration talk about Chicago, why is as if they want to ignore the reality that the collar counties around Chicago, you can easily go right across the border. It is not far into Indiana. Police there have actually traced significant number of the shootings in Chicago to guns that were actually purchased in those particular places there. So frankly, it really means nothing to say Chicago has a strict gun control law when it's very easy to access guns at gun shops right across the border in Mike Pence's Indiana.
Well, I agree with you, and it never seems to amaze me how this conversation is always redirected and pointed away from the real issues, and that easy access to firearms is typically the go-to response for me. Is that, we have to accept this as a multifaceted issue. You can't just say, look at Chicago, because there are so many things that we have to do in general just to make sure that we're looking at the social services that are woefully underfunded there. I mean, and then we can expect the next talking point to be mental illness, right? I mean, we want to make sure that we change the narrative and we stay focused on what the real issue is here. And it's not even the expansion of the mental illness conversation that comes behind every shooting when we hear we'll take a look at it now. I mean, there are many people with mental health issues that are not going to be violent and will not be violent. We should not start talking about people's health statuses. We have to talk about behavior and what studies show. Studies show that if you're putting firearms in the hands of someone that is dangerous, that's a lethal combination. So let's look at what the real problem is where are we going to have the conversation where it starts that this is not a new problem. It's longstanding. It goes far beyond Sandy Hook. These conversations need action, and it shouldn't take right now for that to happen. You shouldn't have to have 59 people that are massacred for people in Congress to start having conversations. It's time to start implementing processes.
Well,
that's my take.
Yeah, but here's the deal, though. I mean, the reality is you can't do that when you have a country that, frankly, violence is deep in the DNA of this country. At some point, we have to acknowledge that America was founded on the basis of violence. Violence against Native Americans, violence against African Americans. America was created at the butt and the barrel of a gun. And so that's where we are. And so when you have folks who don't want to own up to that, I mean, we have to accept the reality of who we are as a violent nation that somehow believes the answer to every problem in America or even around the world is a gun?
You know, I want to say we have a lot of tools and resources available to us to help us have this dialogue. And, you know, simply put, I think that when we talk about the history and the nature of violence there, it goes back to being powerful in the space of knowledge and education. And one of the most important things that we do that's important to me is to make sure that people understand that just because individuals or folks in communities happen to be poor does not mean that they're not powerful. So we have to help provide the necessary information so that our communities that are impacted by daily gun violence, that never get these conversations on a consistency, understand where they are in the sense of what policies are we talking about, what needs to be amended, what needs to be changed, what needs to be written. And we have to also teach individuals what engagement looks like. And that's just all parties and making sure that we are all consistent about one thing. We want to be safe. Everyone wants to be safe. They want their children safe, their loved ones safe. You can't go anywhere today and be safe because of violence. And history does not have to keep repeating itself. I mean, if we look at where we are with research on gun violence prevention, we're basically nowhere. And why is that?
All right. Kayla Hicks, we appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, here's a statement from the NRA, the National Rifle Association. Quote, the NRA believes that devices designed to allow semi-automatic rifles to function like fully automatic rifles should be subject to additional regulations. We urge Congress to pass national right to carry reciprocity, which will allow law-abiding Americans to defend themselves and their families from acts of violence. Let's go to our panel here. We have Brandon Cooper, chairman of the Prince George's County Republican Party, Barbara Arnwine, founding president of the Transformative Justice Coalition, Joseph Pinion, chair of the Conservative Color Coalition. All right, so the NRA, okay, who the hell do you think they're fooling with their statements? Oh, let's regulate this, but let's then allow folks to carry guns across state lines because to really protect themselves. Nice try, NRA.
Absolutely. And what's so amazing, Roland, is consider that at the Monday of this week, Congress was having hearings on permitting silencers and bulletproof vests piercing armor. Can you imagine? Bullets, they were going to try to make all of that legal. And in fact, Donald Trump's, one of his sons actually did a commercial that was showing how these kinds of weapons, the silencers, would be great because people wouldn't have to hear the bullets. Imagine what would have happened at that concert if people hadn't heard the bullets. How many more people would be dead right now? How many more bodies we would be having to, look at in the morgue, trying to still identify all the people. This is a gun culture society. Until we change our viewpoints as Americans about guns and really push, because most Americans think there should be gun control, but we need to really hold our elected officials accountable. That's where the deficit is.
Bottom line is here, Brandon, I see the NRA statement. Really? Whenever you hear the NRA calling for regulation of any type of gun, you better look at the fine details.
I agree, and I think NRA has lost credibility on both the left and the right on some issues, particularly, I think, maybe if this wrong, was the Flannel Castile, I think up in Missouri, when they were kind of silent in the aftermath of that. So NRA, I'm not a huge fan of, but just to your point about, gun control law.
One second. You say it lost credibility to the left and the right of the issue. What's the left and the right of the issue?
All I can say is this again. There are people on the right, and you can co-sign on this, who think that the NRA is not. The fact that they're even trying to go along with the Democrats' proposal to ban buck stops, there are a lot of Republican conservatives who are now against the NRA, saying they're too soft. They need to protect their gun rights. So I'm saying is that I'm saying right. They're both sides when they're criticizing the NRA. But my point
is, who the hell is called the NRA soft?
There are a lot of conservatives who are now moving to Gun Owners of America and other organizations because they feel like it's too established. That's just my point.
Okay, gotcha.
To your point about gun control, the Washington Post did an article and they looked at I think Marco Rubio's statement that none of the mass shootings since 2012, since Newtown, would have been prevented if all the Democrats' proposals on gun control had went through. And this is the Washington Post, not a Republican outlet, who confirmed that was true. And to your point about, I agree with you, it is a cultural issue. The problem with guns is a cultural issue. The idea about silencers being able to prevent what happened in Las Vegas, is looking at the facts that even with the...
I didn't say prevention. I said
okay,
it would
Hold on. With a silencer, let me say
say
this. With a silencer on the gun, the decibel is still 170 decibels, which is a jackhammer. It is not a silencer, it's a suppressor.
Okay, hold on.
It is not about keeping the gun silent.
Joseph, I'm about to go to you. Here's what I'm not going to do, the game I'm not going to play. I don't chase down rabbit holes. When somebody says, had we enacted these, it would not have prevented what happened in Las Vegas. Let's not act like Las Vegas was the only mass shooting that we've seen in this country. Mass shootings mean the killing of more than one individual. We've seen more than 1,700 mass shootings since what took place in Sandy Hook. The bottom line is this here. Why do we act as if any effort to prevent a gun death somehow shouldn't be put in place because it would not have stopped what happened in Las Vegas? Of course not. The guy was on the 32nd floor, 400 yards away with multiple high-powered weapons. You could have had all 22,000 people at that concert armed with handguns, and not one of their bullets would have been able to reach homeboy on a 32nd floor.
So I believe that, couple points here. Number one, we have to talk about the fact that you're talking about the act of a madman. You're talking about the act of terrorism, right? I think that I agree with the fact that, number one, I appreciate the fact that we're talking about this as a form of terrorism, right? Because it seems that
black folks get it. The rest of the media clearly doesn't.
Right, because again, I think when you talk about it from the standpoint of every single media outlet having terrorism specialists on, having every single media outlet having individuals talking about things in forms of everything but terrorism, it's a problem, right? Moving to your point about how do we move forward? How do we have a safer society? How do we protect at the same time constitutionally established rights, right? I think that on the left, I think there has to be some type of consensus trying to understand how we're going to talk about gun control, how we're going to talk about issues that are going to move us forward. I think that there's a lot of misalignment on the left side of the aisle when we start talking about, okay, are we going to be talking about gun control? Are we talking about sensible regulations that conservatives can get behind? We start talking about getting rid of butt stocks, or you're talking about things saying, oh, we're just going to abolish the Second Amendment. I don't really care. And as much as people want to say, oh, no one's coming for the guns, no, people are coming for the guns on some basic level. So I think that there are sensible legislations that we can put in place that are going to allow us as a society to have a safer society, to have people be able to have their children go out the door and feel safer, and then things that ultimately are not actually going to make us safer, but are just ultimately rooted in paper sometimes.
But the struggle for us on this issue, again, is we don't want to accept who we are at our core. Right. See, I mean, that's just what it boils down to. Right. It's just like, as you were just talking, you were talking about what is established in the United States Constitution. The 15th Amendment establishes you cannot deny people the right to vote based upon color. Well, if that was the case, there would have not been a need for the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Right. There would not have been a need for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or the Fair Housing Act of 1968. So America loves to be very situational when it comes to how it believes hardcore in constitutional amendments. What we have here is a fundamental issue, and that is, will America come to grips with the fact that at our core, we are a violent nation? And how do we then keep weapons out of the hands of individuals? When you have folks who are arguing that, you know what, we should let people who have been convicted of domestic violence go ahead and get a gun. Really? Even though we have clear examples of individuals who are violent in nature, who beat women, who when they get their hands on a gun are more likely to kill their partner. But we go, yeah, but it's a constitutional right. That's where we are. And I think what you have is an NRA who does not want any restrictions. Their philosophy is we don't want any, because if we even give up one, then all of a sudden it might lead to 2 and 3 and 4. And that's where we are right now.
So So I would counter that to say, look, we go back to Barbara Jordan talking about what the people want is simple, an America that is good as its promise. All right, so America is greater than just our laws, right? It's also the spirit of what we are trying to establish here as a nation.
Well, that's what we say. That's not what we do.
Well, so two things, right? It's the two put together, right? Because you have Dr. King talking about that, you know, all we ask of America is to be true to what we say on paper, right? And you have Barbara Jordan talking about the promise of what America is. Those are two very separate things.
Too many Americans can't even read what's on paper.
Right. So again, to that point, again, look, we get that when you talk about the spirit of the law and also the essence of who we are, those are two very different things that need to somehow come together, to coalesce.
Well,
Barbara, final comment.
Yeah, spirit, letter of the law. But the bottom line is that we could do better. There are other nations that are just as wealthier, that don't have this problem.
Right.
And it's because we don't have the right laws in place. If you had the restriction, for example, on the domestic violence perpetrators, that would have taken down more than half of the mass killings that we've seen. So let's be very honest about what's going on here. And we just got to do it. We got to stop, Americans, we got to stop tolerating this.
Well,
we need to hold these elected officials accountable.
We also, as a nation, have got to stop believing that somehow we can tell everybody else in the world what's best for them.
While
and as if we can actually learn from some other countries.
Like Australia.
And that's also part of the arrogance of America.
Yes.
Or or the exceptionalism of America, where we somehow believe that we know better than anybody else, as if what they did can't actually help us.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh, my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no. That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.